Okay, I wanted to do a brief presentation on the Spanish flu of 1918. Personally, I think this whole thing with the coronavirus does give us some good learning opportunities, and learning a little bit about history is a good thing. So without further ado, here we go. The overview I have in mind, I just want to talk about a few resources, talk about what it was, where did it start, briefly mention some fatalities, and try to answer the question of will it happen again? So, some good resources to keep in mind. I have been reading this very, very interesting book, The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. It is an excellent, excellent, excellent book. If you want to read more on this, this is one I highly recommend. As you can see here, it's a New York Times bestseller. Not too much surprise, it even has some good reviews from the Chicago Tribune. Excellent book if you want to learn more about this time period in history. Also, the Smithsonian's website has some insightful things, and history.com has some good information too. But if you really want to learn more about this, and if you're in the medical field, I certainly do recommend that you do that. It's good to know the basics of what happened. It certainly was the deadliest pandemic in history. Excellent book from Mr. Barry. So, what was it? The Spanish flu pandemic of 1918 is classified as the deadliest in history. It infected an estimated 500 million people worldwide. It's a lot of people. That, according to estimates, is about 1/3 of the planet's population. Killed an estimated 200 to 50 million people. So there were a lot of victims in this, and reading up some of the information on the pandemic in and of itself, they just didn't have room for the bodies. It was just really, really, really horrible. Of what was estimated, over 500,000 Americans died. It is interesting to note that it did not originate in Spain. Spain was actually neutral in World War I, and because it played a more neutral role, the Spanish press could say what they wanted, when they wanted, as they wanted it. And because of that, people started hearing more about the flu from Spain, and they called it the Spanish flu. It did not start there, but because that the Spanish media was more liberal, that's what everybody started thinking. So, where did it start? Technically, nobody knows. Experts say it was outside the US, but those are just some experts. Nobody really knows. This picture right here actually comes from Camp Funston in Kansas. A lot of people think the flu started in Kansas. So nobody can technically pinpoint where it was. You can see with this picture here, this is a very, very important picture from a historical perspective. It's just a really, 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 really crowded conditions, and it's really, really sad, but this is what they had. This was actually some of the more spacious settings in this time period, and we'll talk a little bit about that shortly. So if you want to know where did it start, no one knows. A little bit more information on the fatalities. Interesting to note, too, that according to history.com, the exact numbers are impossible to know due to a lack of medical record keeping in many places. So we have a lot of information, but we don't. So it's good to remember that. Estimates say that at least 100 million worldwide died, which makes it just an atrocity. It's a lot of people. So what were some of the symptoms? Well, through some of my reading, I found out that the first wave in 1918 wasn't that bad. Most people got over it. But the second wave around the fall of 1918, that was particularly deadly. People were turning blue, and the book I'm reading even explains the logistics of that. They just couldn't process oxygen. They were coughing up blood. Things were just really, 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 really horrible. So the first wave was not that bad. Next wave was horrible. Question to ask, will it happen again? Well, obviously we don't know, but we can assume through inductive reasoning, probably not. Few things that I could say why that is the case. Keep in mind, in the early 1900s, to be a medical doctor, there was very little education, very little experience needed. Most of the time, you had to take a final test, and that was it. That was all that was required. The standards for doctors nowadays are very, very rigorous. You have to go through internships, residencies. You have to have tons and tons and tons and tons of hard college education. It's not a general studies degree. To be a medical doctor, you have to go through a lot of things. In the 1900s, you really didn't have a lot of standards for somebody to be a doctor. Hygiene in the 1900s, it literally didn't exist, especially if you compare it to what's going on today. People shared beds as a lifestyle. There were some of the factory workers in Philadelphia. As soon as they were in a bed, they went off to work. Somebody else shared that same bed. People worked in shifts, and that's just how they slept. That's just how life was. There was no such thing as quarantine. Hygiene, personal space did not exist whatsoever. So overcrowding was an issue. Hygiene was just really, really, really horrendous back then. So because of those things and because of our advancements, our virus is going to be deadly, of course, but it's probably not going to happen again to the level that it did in 1918, and those are just some of the reasons why. So, conclusion. Please read. If you're curious about this, I certainly encourage you to read more, and don't forget to wash your hands. Hopefully you found this informative. Have a good day.